Hello, and welcome to Books and Beyond. My name is Jimmy Bennett. I'll be your host. My show is about regular folks and people that have extra talents. There's a lot of people out there that have regular jobs. I myself am a professional chef at Stone Ridge Retirement Community, but I do write books. I have 3 books written: Case of the Flying Corpse, Accounts of William Gillette, and one more in the works called The Case of the Floating Corpse. But there's a lot of folks out there like you and me that have regular day jobs, do regular things, but have extra talent, whether it's painting or knitting or rug making or whatever. And that's what I like to show and highlight on my show. I am also the co-chairman of the Southeastern Connecticut chapter of CAPA, the Connecticut Authors and Publishers Association. I've met a lot of wonderful people, a lot of wonderful authors, publishers, editors, illustrators, and one of them is Elaine Bentley Baughn, who is my guest today. Elaine is a psychotherapist who has written a book, but she wears many hats. She's also a poet. She is a feng shui consultant, and a speaker and an editor, which we'll get to later. But for now, I'm going to introduce Elaine and let her tell me about your work, what you do, and.
Well, I've been a psychotherapist in this area in New London County since the mid-90s, and I started out working in clinics, and I've been in private practice now for about 18 years. And about 10 years ago, I became semi-retired. So I am now enjoying a little bit more leisure time to do some of the other things I like to do. Good.
And I know psychotherapist, that's kind of an intense field, isn't it?
It can be.
Yeah.
It can be, especially my specialty is anxiety and trauma.
Oh, okay.
So I have a considerable amount of special training to work with that. One of the things that I found is that some of the educational things that I was doing with clients, I was repeating myself from client to client. So I started writing them down, writing these ideas down in little essays that I handed out to clients as homework. After doing that for about 10 years, they kind of told me they wanted to be a book. So I didn't actually set out to write a book.
Oh.
And this is the result, or at least the first result of that. I'm working on my second one as well.
Well, tell us a little bit about 5 Rules for Drama-Free Living.
5 Rules for Drama-Free Living is a practical, accessible, handy way to look at some practical ideas that we weren't trained. Growing up, we don't learn this kind of thing. You might think in terms of emotional intelligence. So it looks at some, people say, why rules? And I say it's like gravity, it's the law.
Right.
These are just the way things are in terms of emotional awareness and how we live in the world. So rule number 1, for example, is there is one thing and only one that I have power over and responsibility for, and that's the person in the mirror. A lot of our pain comes from either not taking responsibility for our own behavior, blaming others, making excuses, waiting for things to get resolved without doing what we actually can, even if it's not a lot. And the other side of that coin is we try to run other people's lives. We give advice that maybe we don't take. We micromanage. We get overly involved in our family members' lives. We try to run our kids' lives. We try to give too much advice to our friends at times. So rule 1 invites you to take a step back and look at what's within your power to manage about yourself. And the biggest benefit from that immediately is there are always at least 10 people watching, and they see you do it successfully, and then that gives them, oh, that's how it's done. You've seen people who said, oh, you can write a book? Well, if you can do it, well, maybe I can do it too. Right. And so we sort of seed those changes when we make those changes in our own lives.
Now, that's interesting when you say, do you think that now, in this day and age with Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, all the, people are so much more connected. They're so much more involved with people in their lives, or at least in the perception of what they post and think. Do you think led to a lot more drama and mental instability, or I don't want to say instability, but
It depends on how you use it. If you have friends, and I'll put the word friends in quotes when we're talking about, say, Facebook. If you have friends who are drama kings and queens, and who are reactive and who post, hot button issues frequently, you're going to have more stimulus to be stressed. So you need to make clear decisions about what that stress does to you and how to manage it so that you can take responsibility for your own actions.
Right.
And that your responses are positive and practical. So I do occasionally, when I'm feeling up to here with stuff, I will unfollow some of my friends at certain times, and it doesn't mean that I don't check in on them or connect with them in other ways, but I will. It's that particular, I don't have room in my head for that kind of noise right now, so I'll move that to the side. Another thing that can happen is that you will connect with people with whom you don't share values, and that will offer opportunities to either, explore your own response. What do I really feel about that? What are my real thoughts about that? Or to maybe educate them. And, a friend of mine just recently posted something and it didn't make sense to me. So I immediately Googled it, found out a little bit more of the rest of the story, and took that information and took it back and posted it under what she had posted. And that wasn't to contradict her, but I had just said, that doesn't quite make sense. So my response to it, the part where I took responsibility, was to get more information rather than to take what she had posted and just blindly forward it, which is unfortunately what happens altogether too often.
I know. I get. I'm concerned sometimes that so much. I see so much of it with the younger people, especially. I didn't grow up in that era. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have Facebook. We didn't have,
different.
And so and I understand, and I try not to say good or bad, because every generation changes, and
individuals are different. Just like you might handle yours differently than I handle mine, they're all handling it different. The key is keep the conversation open, let people know that there are options. For adults, it's know what's out there, know what's going on. I'm an old fogey now. I do Facebook. There are 3 or 4 different apps ahead of me, and I'm not in competition. I don't need to chase
I think you made a good point there, that people need to explore how they feel about things and stuff. I think sometimes these posts and stimulus, they come so fast that they just move on to the next one, to the next one, to the next one, to the next one. And they don't really stop and think, hey, I don't agree with this, or I do agree with this, or, and it's just, it gets jumbled in your mind, I used to say it, and it's, it's not an original thought. I took it from the Sherlock Holmes story, that I only have room for so many facts in my head. And so everything else is dross, and I just push it aside. And I kind of feel that way too. I mean, I try not to get caught up in too much drama. I mean, I keep a practical sort of view. If I'm not going to lose my job, if my car is going to start, if I got a place to sleep tonight, just because somebody didn't invite me to a party or didn't like the way I dressed,
Didn't like your post.
right, okay, you know what I mean? It's not going to make a physical impact on me. And
Unless you
that's right.
tell yourself a story about it and your body starts to have cortisol and adrenaline. I mean, that's where your power
Yeah.
is. How do you talk to yourself about this stuff?
There you go.
And I'm very blessed because I have a number of friends who routinely post uplifting posts. One of my friends posted a Pema Chodron interview yesterday. So I was able to watch a 40-minute interview with Oprah interviewing Pema Chodron, who's a leading American Buddhist nun. So, these things come to me just magically
Right.
out of the internet.
Right.
And so, I think it's important to remember that the medium is just the medium. It's what we do that makes it the message.
There, okay. That's I think a good point. So you wrote the book. You're also a poet.
I am a poet. I published a chapbook called This Language River in 2009. And I find that when I started working on 5 Rules for Drama-Free Living, I set my poetry aside. And when I finished the book and it came out, I thought, oh, now I'm going to get to work on the next book. And I found that I went back to writing poetry again.
Yeah.
So it was almost like I needed that refreshment.
Right.
There's a quote from Sherlock Holmes, you'll like this. It's from A Study in Scarlet, where he says, a change of work is the best rest. And I love that quote because, it's like,
I do too. I
what
don't
kind of
remember it. That's great.
refreshment does
Yeah.
your brain need? You work hard in an office all day, and then you go home and dig in the garden.
Right.
And that refreshes your mind. So I wrote poetry for a few months, and then eventually got around to working on the new book.
Okay. And is your new book in the same vein as the 5 Rules of Drama-Free Living?
Yes, it's going to be another 5 rules. It might be called 5 principles, but it's about relationships.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so
Oh.
it's sort of the next step.
All
I think
right.
I have 5 of these in my head. I'm making notes and dropping them into different file folders at this
Yeah.
stage. And there's new poetry coming now and then, but obviously when I'm thinking prose, not thinking poetry as much. And you know this, when you're writing creatively, I call it the accelerator. When you're writing creatively, when you're in the production mode, you're just going. And you don't have time to worry about the exact details or
Right.
the spelling or the punctuation. You're going forward.
Right.
Editing is break. You use the break, you start and stop, start and stop, start and stop. And at different phases, it's almost like you're in a different gear in your brain. So I'm kind of in the transition now between the writing and the editing phase
Right.
with the next book.
Yeah. That's an interesting point. I can see when I write, I'm making up a story. It's just all coming out of my head. 5 rules, if you've used your training and your life experiences to write a book, you have a focus, you know your material,
These are my observations.
Right.
From 25 plus years in the
Right.
field, this is what I've learned.
So when you write poetry, it must be kind of freeing for you. You can go anywhere you want with it. You can say anything, you know what I mean?
It's probably more like writing fiction.
Yeah.
Because I imagine, I've never written fiction, but I imagine it's kind of, the way I write poetry is I get an idea and then I sort of listen for the next line, listen for it in my head. And I would imagine that in writing fiction, you have this relationship with these characters who live
Yeah.
in your head, and they're just talking, and you're just the scribe.
That's we talked about that in my last show with Rose Young. It's like there's a movie in your head, and you're watching the movie, and while you're watching the movie, you're recording it. And that's the way it that's the way it works for me, anyways. That's how I do. I've always been a big daydreamer though since I was a little kid. Now, editor,
Yes.
how do you liking that?
Well, I love reading. I was trying to do the math the other day and figure out how many thousands of books I've probably read in my life, but it's hard to say.
Yeah.
But I could say that probably in my life I've read at least a book a week.
Oh,
On average.
Yep.
But I've always edited like my friends' papers or that sort of thing. And as I have more and more friends who are authors, I've done a little bit here and there. And with my book, I started realizing how important the editing process is and how many layers of editing. The whole idea that a copy editor, that somebody who's editing for content is kind of a different brain, that those details, you're looking for different things. So I just think it's a fascinating process. And I've done it for free a few times, and I've done it for pay a few times, and I'm still learning how to price myself, because they're different authors at different stages need a different kind of editing.
Right.
So if you've written something, or I'll say this about somebody else because I don't want it to imply you. If someone has written something and nobody else has ever read it, they need somebody in their circle to read it first. They don't need an editor. They need somebody to say, just the basic stuff that anybody's going to catch. You don't need to hire somebody to do that. It needs to go through a few of those reads before you hire an editor.
Yep.
I think.
That's something I've always done. When I finish a book, I usually go get a galley proof made, which is just a crude, printing.
Big old book.
Yeah, big crude printing of it. And I always pick. At first, I just was family and friends, and which is really actually how I got pushed into publishing, because Glenn, my brother-in-law, read the book, and he said, no, we got to do this. And he did a lot of the legwork and the
Nice.
all the technical stuff for me.
Having inside people who enthuse is priceless. It really is. My sister was one of the people who first read this, and I gave it to her in chapters. And another friend named Lynn Lenahan. Both were the people who faced the rough first drafts.
Right.
And I will bless them forever for that.
Yeah, I gotta say, now the same thing, even with in full disclosure, Elaine is editing my new book.
Which is really good, by the way.
Thanks.
I really like it.
And when I did it first, I let my wife read it, and really surprised me. Came back and said she loved it. So I gave it to another man at work that I knew that read a lot. Not a close personal friend, but somebody I knew read a lot and stuff. So and then he liked it, and then I actually gave a copy to some friends in Long Island, who were actually my father's best friend when he was alive, and his wife, and who've been big supporters of me and big fans. So, so now I'm just like, okay, I'm ready to move forward here. And
the thing that was important to me is after I'd had those initial reads, and then I kind of put it out to friends in the field and that sort of thing, and I was getting really, really positive feedback. And I thought, I got to give it to somebody who doesn't love me,
Right.
because I need a tougher audience. And so a friend of a friend I hired, and when I got back her edits, I was a little like frozen for a couple of months because her edits were so strong. And it was like, this is my baby and you don't like my baby.
You're right.
But once I got over my emotional reaction and was able to just remember that an editor's remarks are theirs and the decision is yours. So I was able to go back and look at it from a cooler head, and really was able to make very good use of many of her suggestions.
Right.
And it dramatically improved the book, I think.
Good.
But I was, initially I was clinging to those ideas, and, her idea was that doesn't belong here. It doesn't mean you don't put it somewhere else, but it doesn't belong here. And that made it a much better book.
I had sort of a similar thing when the first draft of The Case of the Flying Corpse, I let somebody read it, and they just started chopping away. You should get rid of this character. You don't need this scene. Tighten it here. Put it, and I got, and I know what you say. At
If
first
John
I was
le
like,
Carré
"Listen,
is telling you that, that's one thing.
Yeah.
But if Joe Schmo down the street's telling you that, I'm going to take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah, well, that's what finally in the end I decided that it's written the way I wanted it written, and I thought it was good, and it doesn't matter. Fortunately, I haven't had any bad feedback yet. I mean, nobody's ever said to me, "I didn't like your book," or blah blah blah. The most I've gotten is from accounts of William Gillette's being a series of short stories. People said, I don't really like short stories. Okay, I can live with that. So, and I know it'll come eventually. Well, I hope I get that big that it does come eventually. But but I think I'll be able to handle it. You know what I mean? I'll be able to say it. Now, another thing I wanted to talk to you about was feng shui.
Yes,
You are a feng shui consultant.
I am that.
Now, I have a sort of a generic idea of what feng shui is from what I read in a book, a fiction book, though. So I'd like you to explain a little bit more about it to me.
Well, feng
To us.
shui is an art and science of placement, meaning that the way we arrange our physical worlds has an effect on our emotion, on our energy, but on our emotions, on our success, on the way we interact. And depending on the degree to which you go into it, you can learn an awful lot about how to adjust your space and support the things you want to have happen in your life.
Now, is that the context I read it in was, even so much how doorways were placed in buildings and which way the windows faced and that kind of thing. I understand in I think China and in some cultures, right? They
It's
really
Chinese originally.
when they go to build a building, they get a consultant to say first, hey.
If you're in San Francisco, you do not sell a house without a feng shui consultant.
No kidding.
Seriously. It's that because the Asian culture has so much influence in California, realtors know that that's the kind of thing that's going to help them sell.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
I'm surprised, really. I guess the only thing I can sort of liken it to, but I can see your point is, even though I've noticed that when I don't want to say slob, but I'm just one of them people that pile stuff up everywhere.
You're organizationally challenged.
Oh, I am just horrible. And my desktop's cluttered. The top of my bureaus are cluttered. My nightstands, and but my wife actually got on me about it, and she said, "Hey, you need to, pick up and organize yourself, and you're going to feel, a lot better." And I started doing it, and I do. I think I sleep better, and I wake up in the morning, and I don't look around to this like look like a bomb
And feel
went off
overwhelmed already.
Yeah, you know what I mean? And,
That's
and,
huge.
you know, it sort of does keep me a little bit more focused. But you know what? We're running out of time here. So I want you to
amazing.
tell me how to get your book and what you have coming up.
Okay. Well, there are several places locally that have my book. Bank Square in Mystic, the Natural Food Store in Niantic, the Shops at the Mill House in Chester, Small Potatoes in Norwich, and of course on Amazon it's available in paperback as well as an ebook format. And at your local independent bookstore. Engagements, I have 2 coming up in the new year. There's a place called the Women's Consortium in Hamden, and I'm doing a talk in April. These are both trainings for professionals on resilience, and one in June on tools for working, for the therapist tools for working, particularly with trauma, but with clients in general.
Oh, good.
So I'm really looking forward to
right.
doing that, because that's a very, it's a big deal for me to get to present there.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you
And
very
thank
much.
you so much for being on my show. I appreciate it.
My delight. Thank you.
Tonight is the Southeastern Connecticut CAPA meeting. It's going to be at the Groton Regency at 6:30. I'll be there. I am going to be at the Fitch Music Booster Craft Fair on November 9th. More on that. Hope everybody will show up and support our local school in the music programs, which I believe are very important.
Absolutely.
Too many things are being cut out of our budgets that, you know, as far as arts and stuff, and I want to support them as much as possible.
They're important for brain function.
They are.
particularly, yeah.
You know, as always, you know, I encourage everybody to read and, you know, give your children books, you know, and get out there and be creative. So thank you very much, and we'll see you next time on Books and Beyond.
Thank you.